focus of all those documentaries and Hollywood movies. But there's one version of Titanic we have never seen until this morning.
It's been over a century since Titanic vanished beneath the cold, dark waves of the North Atlantic, taking its stories and secrets with it. By now, most of us believe we've heard it all. The iceberg, the chaos, the tragedy. But what if we've missed something? Recently, miles below the ocean's surface, scientists stumbled upon an astonishing find. A small, leather-bound diary, miraculously preserved against all odds. Its pages, delicate and faded, might rewrite everything we thought we knew about Titanic's final hours. Whose diary was this, hidden for decades beneath mud and rust? What desperate truths or haunting confessions did its owner leave behind, unaware the world might someday listen? Tonight, for the very first time, you'll hear words written by someone who lived and perhaps foresaw the tragedy that changed history forever. It's almost impossible to imagine the odds. A tiny diary, no larger than your hand, perfectly intact beneath 2.5 miles of crushing ocean water and darkness. The scientists initially thought it was nothing more than debris, perhaps a scrap of leather from someone's luggage, twisted metal, or even just an oddly shaped stone. But as the remote-operated submersible gently disturbed layers of sediment, something emerged that instantly silenced the control room. A thin strip of leather, unmistakably book-like, remarkably untouched by time. The diary was brought carefully to the surface. The process alone was painstaking, meticulous, almost reverent, as though disturbing it could erase whatever story remained hidden within its pages. When it finally reached the laboratory, scientists held their breath, gathered around under clinical white lights, waiting for answers that had waited silently on the ocean floor for over a century. The pages, thin and fragile as butterfly wings, resisted at first. Specialists in historical documents carefully eased them apart, applying gentle heat and microscopic tools. Each page turned revealed handwriting that was barely legible at first glance, words blurred and faded like distant memories struggling to stay alive. Yet as the hours passed, clarity emerged. Ink darkened again under UV lights, words became legible, and a story began to breathe. It soon became clear this wasn't just a passenger's diary casually documenting the mundane details of an ocean crossing. The author had clearly been troubled, and the writing grew increasingly frantic as it neared the date the Titanic met its fate. Who was this person? Was it a frightened passenger sensing impending doom? Was it a crew member harboring secret knowledge? Or perhaps someone else entirely? Someone whose existence had slipped unnoticed through history's careful documentation. The diary began with ordinary observations of life aboard Titanic, the luxurious dining halls, laughter echoing along the deck, the quiet hum of the massive engines. Yet, just days into the journey, the tone shifted subtly, then sharply toward unease. Entries spoke of hushed conversations overheard between crew members, voices anxious, eyes darting. The author noticed men gathering discreetly near the ship's lower decks at odd hours, moving crates labeled as provisions yet handled with strange secrecy. "Something is not right aboard this ship," one entry began starkly. "Perhaps it's my nerves, perhaps the vastness of the ocean, but there's something else. Something hidden beneath the polished smiles of the crew." Then a later entry, more chilling. "I awoke last night to whispers outside my cabin door." Two men argued quietly, furiously in words too muffled to grasp, but one phrase lingered clearly. They cannot know, not yet. Who are they referring to? Passengers, the crew, and what must we not know? At this point, the scientists reading these entries began to feel a chill that had nothing to do with temperature-controlled labs. The author had clearly stumbled upon something unsettling, something deliberately hidden, potentially dangerous. And then, 3 days before Titanic struck the iceberg, an entry stood out in haunting clarity. "I have seen something tonight that will haunt me forever. Deep in the bowels of the ship, behind crates stacked high in the cargo hold, there was a room I was not meant to find. Instruments of navigation unlike any I've seen, maps I cannot decipher, and men who turned toward me with eyes like ice. One of them stepped forward, his voice cold as the Atlantic itself. Forget you ever saw this, or we'll ensure you do." Scientists stopped there. The room fell silent. Titanic had been explored, studied, documented endlessly, but never had a narrative this chilling and specific emerged from its ruin. What had the diary's author discovered? Was Titanic really carrying something secret, something that warranted such threats? If so, was it connected somehow to the ship's tragic fate, or was this merely paranoia of an anxious passenger's mind? But the diary offered more, much more, and as pages continued to unfold, the puzzle deepened. The next entries grew increasingly fragmented, desperate and terrified, culminating in a final entry dated April 14th, 1912, the very night Titanic sank. It was brief, panic evident in the hastily scribbled words, "They've come for me. I hear them at the door. If anyone finds this diary, know that the iceberg is no accident. We were never meant to arrive." The scientists leaned back, hearts pounding. The implications were stunning. Could Titanic's sinking truly have been orchestrated, as this final message implied? Was there a hidden hand guiding events, manipulating history, and condemning over 1,500 innocent souls to a watery grave? It was almost too much to accept. And yet, here it was, written clearly, starkly, unambiguously, a voice from Titanic's very decks, screaming silently through decades to finally be heard. In the days after the diary's discovery, the laboratory became a fortress of silence. Specialists worked tirelessly, combing every inch of handwriting, cross-checking against known passenger lists, crew manifests, and historical accounts. Yet no direct match could be found. Whoever wrote these frantic words had effectively disappeared from history, or had perhaps never officially existed at all. A deep dive into historical archives led researchers toward darker corners of Titanic's lore. For decades, conspiracy theories had lingered in the shadows, whispers of sabotage or foul play quickly dismissed by historians as mere sensationalism. But suddenly, the diary had shifted these theories from absurd to chillingly plausible. One entry stood out prominently, dated April 13th, just one day before the fatal collision. The author scribbled hastily, "Tonight I spoke to a crew member who appeared terrified, yet resolute. He told me in hushed, frantic tones about a strange device aboard. He called it the Aegis, something powerful and unknown stored deep in the hold. They're playing with things far beyond our understanding," he whispered, eyes wide with fear. "If something goes wrong, none of us will ever see land again." Could the Aegis be real, or simply a code for something else entirely? Specialists turned to ship manifests again, meticulously scanning cargo lists. Unsurprisingly, nothing labeled Aegis appeared, but there were numerous crates unaccounted for. Cargo listed merely as scientific instruments, vague and deliberately obscure. Adding to the mystery was the historical context. 1912 sat firmly within the tense years leading up to World War I, a time when scientific breakthroughs were coveted secrets, fiercely guarded by competing empires. Titanic herself wasn't just a luxury liner. She was a symbol of British industrial might. Could her voyage have doubled as something more clandestine? Could someone on board have intended to smuggle classified research, new technology, or even military secrets? These questions intensified with another haunting diary entry. "I've begun to piece together something sinister. The captain himself seems on edge, uneasy around certain men I've noticed on board. Men not listed in any official register. Who are they? Why do they move freely, yet invisibly? They speak quietly of Germany, of technology and power. I fear Titanic might be a pawn in a far larger game. My fears are no longer mere paranoia. We are not safe." Historians and experts paused at this revelation. Was it possible the sinking of Titanic was not the tragic result of an iceberg collision alone, but instead linked to international espionage, sabotage, or even early acts of wartime hostility? It sounded implausible, yet, when combined with eyewitness accounts documented in the diary, it felt distressingly believable. To verify this extraordinary theory, investigators turned their attention to a forgotten record, a telegram received by the White Star Line offices shortly after Titanic's disappearance. It had long been dismissed as a cruel hoax, filed away and buried deep in archival records. But now, under new scrutiny, the message took on a chilling resonance. "Collision, no accident. Stop German agents aboard. Stop, protect the secret. Stop disaster. Inevitable, stop." For over a century, this telegram had languished unnoticed, treated as nonsense by authorities desperate to control narrative and panic. Now, juxtaposed with diary entries hinting strongly at sabotage, the message resurfaced with shocking clarity. Researchers pressed further, cross-referencing passenger backgrounds against intelligence records and diplomatic files. Astonishingly, certain names aboard Titanic, seemingly ordinary travelers, aligned closely with known agents and operatives active in pre-war Europe. Passengers whose personal histories faded abruptly after 1912, as if erased deliberately by unseen hands. The implications were staggering. Had Titanic unwittingly hosted a covert intelligence war beneath her elegant facade? Was her demise, far from accidental, actually premeditated, a desperate attempt to silence knowledge too dangerous to be revealed? One final diary entry provided a dark clue, this one written just hours before Titanic sank beneath the waves. They have set the course. They will strike tonight, blame it on ice. I begged the captain to listen, but he turned away, eyes haunted by duty or fear. I couldn't tell. God forgive me, I failed. If anyone reads these words, seek the truth not in the sea, but in the hearts of men who betray their own humanity. These were the last coherent words. The rest, scribbled hurriedly, barely legible, were simply names and brief descriptions, potentially identifying the conspirators. Yet, frustratingly, the final pages had suffered immense damage. Ink bleeding, words lost to history's cruel hand. Despite incomplete records, the diary had forever altered Titanic's narrative. A ship that symbolized human ambition and tragedy now stood also as a stark emblem of humanity's hidden capacity for deception, intrigue, and betrayal. As historians prepared to publish their explosive findings, controversy exploded across media platforms. Titanic, once comfortably fixed in history as a story of hubris and tragedy, now bore sinister undertones, its legacy suddenly open to fierce debate. Debates raged in newsrooms, online forums, classrooms, and coffee shops across America. Had the world's most famous maritime disaster been deliberately engineered? Was history itself now at stake? But amidst the noise and confusion, one undeniable fact lingered hauntingly clear. The diary's anonymous author, whoever they had been, had risked, and likely lost, their life attempting to warn humanity of a threat far greater than any iceberg. Their voice, silenced beneath waves for over a century, now resonated powerfully, painfully, demanding truth and justice from beyond the grave. As the investigation wound down, one question lingered, compelling and unanswered. If Titanic had indeed been sabotaged, how many other historic tragedies might bear similar, undiscovered secrets? Could we trust history at all? Thus, the small diary, found miraculously preserved, not only altered our understanding of Titanic, but challenged humanity's very relationship with the truth. It forced us, uncomfortably, to consider that behind every accepted narrative might lurk darker motives, hidden secrets, and untold betrayals. What other secrets lie waiting in the quiet depths? Which other voices remain unheard, lost in darkness, silently pleading to be revealed? In the end, the diary left historians, scientists, and all who heard its story with something far more disturbing than closure. It left them with uncertainty. And perhaps that uncertainty itself was the diary's most powerful revelation, a warning etched eternally in the frigid depths. History, as we know it, is only as true as those who control it. The diary's revelation triggered an immediate storm of controversy. Media outlets ran sensational headlines, interviews erupted into fierce debates, historians argued bitterly in televised panels. Titanic, already legendary, had now become something else entirely. A ghost ship of espionage, conspiracy, and murder, its narrative fractured and contentious, more intriguing than ever. But for the investigative team, the work had only just begun. A new wave of evidence emerged as the diary story spread worldwide. Relatives of Titanic survivors, emboldened by revelations, came forward with long-held family secrets. Letters, memoirs, and personal accounts buried deep within private archives found their way to investigators, each piece another glimpse into Titanic's hidden turmoil. One such account came from the great-granddaughter of a surviving crew member named Patrick Malone. Her grandfather had whispered tales of a frantic midnight encounter aboard the Titanic. Malone, who had worked deep in the engine rooms, spoke of mysterious visitors, men who moved with quiet urgency, who knew precisely where to go, who acted. Not with panic, but calculated efficiency. Grandpa said those men weren't crew. They carried themselves differently. They weren't afraid, she explained, her voice shaking slightly, handing over her grandfather's faded notes to the investigators. Those notes, crude and incomplete yet filled with urgency, aligned disturbingly with the diary's claims. They spoke of changing the course, Malone had written, hastily, desperately. They knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't fear the ocean. They feared discovery. They feared losing whatever dark prize they guarded below. The researchers were stunned by how closely Malone's account matched the diary's narrative, lending a chilling validity to a theory once considered impossible. If Titanic's course had indeed been altered, even subtly, to ensure a collision, how many crew members, how many innocent passengers had unknowingly become casualties in a clandestine act of international sabotage? Digging further, investigators turned to archival military intelligence records from that era. They uncovered documents revealing heightened tensions between Britain and Germany, espionage reports mentioning clandestine activities aboard passenger liners, and coded messages intercepted by British naval intelligence mere weeks before Titanic's voyage, references to a package aboard an ocean liner bound for New York. Could Titanic have been unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, used as a transport vessel for sensitive materials, dangerous secrets, or experimental technologies? The idea seemed absurd, yet evidence kept stacking. One intercepted message read ominously clear: "Secured aboard liner, rendezvous set, ensure absolute secrecy." What exactly was the package? Was this the mysterious Aegis mentioned in the diary? As the team grappled with these dark possibilities, a final startling piece of evidence surfaced. A letter had been quietly preserved in the archives of the White Star Line's chief office, addressed to Titanic's Captain Edward Smith. Its brief, cryptic lines read, "Captain, your discretion regarding cargo is imperative. Protect at all costs. Consider your mission a patriotic duty, despite potential sacrifices. History shall judge kindly those who serve loyally." Historians had previously dismissed this as insignificant, perhaps a bureaucratic note regarding expensive cargo, but now its hidden meaning appeared glaringly obvious. Had Captain Smith known exactly what he carried aboard Titanic, or was he too trapped unknowingly within this web of deceit? Was Titanic's captain a willing participant, or simply caught between duty and morality? More than ever, the diary's words resonated ominously. Seek the truth, not in the sea, but in the hearts of men. Facing mounting evidence, even hardened skeptics conceded the possibility of conspiracy, espionage, and sabotage. Titanic's romantic tragedy had become a cold, calculated crime scene, submerged not just in ocean water, but in a century-long cover-up. Yet, not everyone accepted these revelations. Skeptics accused investigators of sensationalism. Historians fought bitterly to preserve Titanic's legacy as tragic accident, not conspiracy. But public opinion, electrified by the discovery, had already begun shifting irreversibly. Television specials, documentaries, best-selling books, all seized upon the story, each revelation pushing Titanic's narrative further from romanticized tragedy into an unsettling saga of betrayal, espionage, and lost innocence. The investigative team faced criticism but remained resolute. They understood the stakes, not just Titanic's history, but how history itself is crafted. Were they prepared to challenge a narrative so deeply ingrained in collective memory? As controversy swirled, investigators made one final poignant discovery: the identity of the diary's author. Deep archival research revealed that the handwriting closely matched that of Alexander Bishop, a previously obscure passenger, traveling alone, whose records ended abruptly in 1912. An ordinary man, forgotten by history, now thrust dramatically back into its spotlight. Bishop, according to surviving relatives' accounts, had been a quiet man of intellect and observation, a private individual unlikely to draw attention. How he stumbled upon the truth remains unknown, but clearly he had paid the ultimate price for discovering Titanic's darkest secrets. A ceremony was held quietly on a cold April morning, exactly 112 years after Titanic's sinking. Descendants of survivors and investigators gathered solemnly by the ocean, a symbolic gesture honoring Alexander Bishop, and the countless others silenced that tragic night. One investigator stepped forward, speaking softly into the wind. "We stand here today, not just to honor those who perished, but to remind ourselves of the fragility of truth. Titanic teaches us not only of human bravery and loss, but also human capacity for secrecy and deceit. Let us never again allow silence and lies to drown voices demanding to be heard." In the wake of this new understanding, museums worldwide began revising exhibits. History books added cautious footnotes, and educators reshaped lessons taught to new generations. Titanic's story, once clear-cut and comforting in its tragedy, had transformed into something far more complex and profound. It reminded humanity starkly of one powerful truth: our history is always incomplete, always changing, a tapestry woven as much from lies and secrecy as from bravery and sacrifice. Yet questions lingered, as unsettling as ever. How many other stories were hidden, untold, buried quietly beneath waves of historical narrative? How much of history was real, and how much merely an agreed-upon illusion? Titanic, forever immortalized as a ship of dreams and tragedy, had become a vessel of truth itself, forcing humanity to confront an uncomfortable reality: that our shared past may never be entirely ours to know. In the end, the diary's revelations did more than challenge Titanic's historical record. They left an indelible mark on how society understands truth itself, shattering certainty and replacing it with something both precious and fragile: the freedom and responsibility to question everything. Perhaps that was Alexander Bishop's final silent gift to us all. A reminder, scribbled desperately in ink, preserved impossibly beneath crushing depths, finally surfaced to awaken a sleeping world. Question history, question everything, or risk being swallowed by silence. As Alexander Bishop's identity and his chilling words echoed through the corridors of history, the investigative team returned to the diary again, relentlessly examining each line, each entry for missed clues. The question haunted them day and night: if Titanic truly carried a secret, what exactly was it? Could it have altered the course of history had it reached New York intact? The diary hinted at a name: Aegis. The investigators expanded their search internationally, scouring old military archives across the UK, Germany, and the United States. Surprisingly, the word Aegis appeared sporadically in intelligence briefings of that era. Classified notes from a British intelligence operative stationed in Berlin described a rumored German technology called Aegis, developed in secrecy, a cutting-edge communication and navigation device decades ahead of its time. The diary's vague references suddenly crystallized into clarity. Titanic wasn't merely a passenger liner. It may have unknowingly, or even knowingly, carried a revolutionary technology, so significant it risked tipping the scales of global power. The presence of German agents aboard became distressingly logical. The liner's luxurious facade masked a high-stakes game of international espionage. Another detail emerged from the archives: the sudden, mysterious reassignment of several experienced crew members only days before Titanic departed Southampton. Among them, experienced wireless operators and seasoned engineers. Why remove key personnel from a maiden voyage of such prominence? Had someone high in command wanted to ensure the success or the failure of a clandestine operation? Investigators discovered a long-overlooked testimony from Harold Bride, one of Titanic's surviving wireless operators. In a report buried deep in court transcripts from the British inquiry, Bride had quietly described a suspicious interruption on Titanic's wireless system hours before the collision. Someone had briefly disabled communications, only to restore them shortly afterward. The significance of this sabotage had been dismissed at the time as a technical glitch, but now it appeared deliberate, sinisterly strategic. The puzzle became clearer, yet more disturbing. Titanic was indeed on course, straight toward known ice fields. If radio communication had been disrupted deliberately, perhaps the intention was not merely to sabotage Titanic's cargo, but to silence the ship entirely. Had someone on board Titanic wanted it never to reach New York, no matter the human cost? With new eyes, the team revisited Titanic's collision timeline. They noticed another unsettling anomaly: records of lifeboat preparations delayed inexplicably, orders for evacuations stalled repeatedly, crew confusion documented vividly by survivors. Titanic's final night, once painted as tragic confusion, now appeared almost purposefully chaotic. Survivors' testimonies took on new meaning. Passengers described crew hesitations, odd conversations overheard, whispered debates among officers. Fragments previously dismissed as panic or confusion now hinted at intentional obstruction. Titanic had sunk with nearly two-thirds of her lifeboats unfilled. Had this tragic negligence been deliberate? Had someone aboard wished to limit survivors, to limit witnesses? The diary's final cryptic warning returned, ringing louder than ever. "They've come for me. The iceberg is no accident." Then, suddenly, another discovery. Deep within naval intelligence archives in Britain, hidden under layers of secrecy, emerged blueprints for a naval device codenamed Aegis, an advanced navigational instrument rumored capable of disrupting enemy communications and even remotely altering the course of vessels. German intelligence had reportedly sought it urgently, recognizing its revolutionary potential. Had Titanic become the secret battleground for control of this advanced, terrifying technology? The investigative team pieced together a chilling scenario. Titanic, carrying a covert shipment destined for American allies, became the unwilling pawn in a deadly spy game. Saboteurs aboard planned its destruction, masquerading their actions behind a seemingly natural disaster, leaving history unaware of their dark interference. Thus, Titanic's legendary tragedy was possibly engineered. Not a mere maritime disaster, but one of history's first large-scale acts of espionage, sabotage, and international intrigue. When news of these revelations broke publicly, reaction was swift, fierce, and deeply divided. Families of Titanic victims demanded answers, historians grappled publicly, and governments, both American and British, remained conspicuously silent. Debates consumed social media, talk shows, and classrooms across the globe. Titanic's narrative, once comfortably enshrined as a tragic accident, was suddenly an open wound, raw and painful with uncertainty. Amid the chaos, investigators pressed forward relentlessly. They knew any conclusion would forever alter how humanity remembered Titanic. They knew history's foundations had shifted irrevocably, and answers, no matter how unsettling, had become a moral imperative. Months after the diary's discovery, as the fervor reached fever pitch, an elderly woman named Sarah Carver reached out to the team from rural Vermont. Her grandfather, Joseph Carver, a survivor from Titanic's third class, had lived his entire life tormented by nightmares. Shortly before his death, Joseph had entrusted Sarah with a sealed box, instructing her solemnly, "Keep this safe until the world is ready for the truth." Inside that box, investigators found faded photographs, telegrams, and a single handwritten letter. The letter, written by Joseph in trembling handwriting, described vividly a desperate scene on Titanic's lower decks. "Men in strange uniforms," Joseph wrote, "giving orders, locking passages, deliberately trapping passengers below." It was an eyewitness account so vivid, so harrowing, investigators wept openly as they read. Sarah, holding back tears, quietly told investigators, "My grandfather carried guilt his whole life. He said he was forced onto a lifeboat by a crewman who whispered urgently, 'Live, so you can someday speak the truth.'" Joseph never knew what truth to speak, only that Titanic's sinking was no accident. Now, finally, through Sarah, his words resonated powerfully, painfully, through a century of silence. Investigators knew their discoveries wouldn't rewrite official history overnight. Institutions cling stubbornly to familiar narratives, histories shaped carefully over generations. But the diary, Joseph Carver's letter, Malone's account, all whispered fiercely that Titanic's truth was darker, colder, and far more calculated than humanity ever imagined. As the world wrestled with the unsettling revelations, investigators made a final journey back to Titanic's resting place. Beneath endless Atlantic waves, Titanic's broken hull stood as a silent sentinel, a graveyard not just of lost lives but also hidden truths. At that cold, windswept moment, the investigators quietly released a ceremonial wreath into the waves, dedicated solemnly to the victims whose voices were silenced and whose stories were stolen. Titanic was never simply a shipwreck, it was humanity itself. Ambition and arrogance, hope and betrayal. Her story wasn't just about the past, It was a stark warning about how easily truth drowns beneath convenient lies. In the end, perhaps Titanic's ultimate truth wasn't about icebergs, sabotage, or espionage. It was about us, about our endless struggle to face uncomfortable realities, our capacity to bury painful truths beneath comforting lies. Alexander Bishop's diary and Joseph Carver's letter echoed fiercely. Humanity's history is fragile, easily manipulated, constantly threatened. Titanic, once a comforting historical tragedy, now stood forever as a stark symbol of truth's vulnerability and humanity's profound responsibility to safeguard it. Across oceans and generations, Titanic would forever remind us to question, to doubt, to seek truths hidden carefully by those who profit from our ignorance. Its story would never again simply comfort or entertain. It would challenge, provoke, haunt, and ultimately inspire. As the researchers returned home, their mission completed but never truly finished, they carried the heavy burden of their discovery. They understood that history isn't static. It breathes, it evolves, constantly reshaped by new evidence, perspectives, and hidden truths surfacing from dark, forgotten depths. The diary began as a voice lost beneath ocean waves. It ended as a thunderous call to humanity's conscience, urging us to protect history from those who rewrite it at will. Titanic, once the world's greatest maritime disaster, had become humanity's most urgent lesson. And as the diary's words echoed hauntingly across a century, seek the truth not in the sea, but in the hearts of men. One could almost hear Alexander Bishop's whisper, solemn yet defiant, drifting through the ages, resonating with every generation who dared listen. Question everything, protect history, or risk being swallowed forever by silence.